Hello, today I'd like to show you how to make a fun little snap bag. It's quite snappy but quite easy to make. It's fun, it's a great little gift, very useful, you could keep all sorts of things in it. And so I'm going to quickly show you how to make this one. So what I've started out with, there will be a pattern for this on my website on gourmetquilter.com, and the pattern would be available to purchase and download. But I'm just going to run through with you today how we go about this. So what we need for a bag this size, as you can see, it's not very big. I've started off with a 5-inch wide strip of fabric, so I've cut my piece for the main part, like where I've used the dot, another dot. That's cut 5 inches wide by 9 inches long, and I've also cut a piece of fairly thin batting. I've used a cotton batting for this because I find that you don't want anything too puffy, and if you use some of the synthetic ones, even the thinner ones can go a little bit puffy unless it's a really thin one. But it did seem to need just a little something. So that's cut 5 inches by 9 inches for the main fabric and your piece of batting. And then for your lining fabric, which is actually the piece that forms the casing here, it also creates the lining inside the bag. That needs to be cut again 5 inches wide, but a bit longer this time because we need to do the fold back to make the little casing. The other thing to make the little snap bits is really just a little piece of metal tape measure. Now you can see I've got black bits on mine. That's because you need to pop a little bit of tape over the edges so that the edge isn't sharp. But this was just one of those roll out metal tape measures, and I cut it into lengths. It actually measures probably about 5/8 of an inch wide, this tape. It's not a very big tape. I only wanted a lightweight one for these little bags and not too wide. So that's about 5/8 of an inch wide, and I've cut it 4 1/4 inches long. So you need 2 pieces. And you can't see it here because I've already put the tape on, I'm sorry, but I just, with some scissors, now you can cut this tape with scissors, but don't use your best scissors. Use some older scissors, possibly even some cheaper scissors, will cut through the metal without any trouble. And just round your edges. You can perhaps see that that tape is actually just sort of floppy on the corners. I just rounded the edges so that there's no sharp points. And then this is just like a duct tape or something, a piece of masking tape, something like that. Just put a piece so that it goes front and back over the ends so that there's no sharp bits that's going to cut through your fabric, or cut you for that matter. But really not hard to use, and makes this wonderful little snappy closure. So to get started on this bag, lay your main piece of fabric on top of your batting piece. Mark your halfway. I actually just did a little finger press fold at halfway. You could pop a pin in there if you wanted to. On your lining piece, same thing. Mark yourself a little halfway with either a pin or just a little finger press. And you're going to lay that one right side down and lay your batting and main piece right side up, but match those little finger press marks either side so that that's sitting nice and central. And then with the iron, we're going to form the casing on the outside of the bag. So because this is extending long enough to form the casing large enough for this tape, if you had a wider tape you would need to allow a little bit more of a turn back here. So I'm actually just going to fold that raw edge in so that it more or less meets where the batting and the other piece of fabric are, and press that, and then I'm going to bring it over yet again right the way over that edge so that it sits snugly around the batting there, and again press that, and I'm going to do the same at the other end. So fold my raw edge in till it more or less meets the batting, then fold it right the way over, and we're going to stitch that now. And just double check, this is meant to be wide enough to be wider than your piece of metal tape, because we're actually going to stitch a line of stitching close to that folded edge and close to this fold to form the casing. So it does need to sit between. So if it's only as wide as your tape with no extra, you do need to have a little bit more fabric there. So I'm going to take that to the sewing machine now, and I'm going to just do a little straight line just close to this fold to stitch that edge down. and I'm going to do another line of sewing close to the outside edge fold. And what that does is gives you a nice neat little casing. And I'm going to do the same at the other end. And again, close to that top folded edge there. And I'm going to just snip my threads off, keep it nice and tidy. And now what we're going to do is we're going to fold that over with the outside fabric actually to the inside, so that the edges sit nicely at the top, that nice folded edge. And I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way down to that fold there. So just watch, this main fabric wants to just pucker a little bit in there, so just keep a little bit of an eye on that and give it a little bit of a tug so that it sits in quite nice and smooth inside there. And just holding it closed, starting. Now when I'm doing something like this where the stitching kind of starts from the top, I actually start just a little way down and then back stitch to the top and down, so that I don't get all my little short trimmed edges at the top there. So I'm just come in from the edge a little bit. I'm going to start sewing, I'm going to back stitch all the way to the top and then come all the way down to the bottom fold. And I'll do the same on the other side. So we've done our first seam. Now don't go getting carried away and doing the second seam just yet, because we've got to pop our little snappy bits in. So these 2 bits of tape measure that you've popped some masking tape onto. Now this sort of tape measure tends to have a little bit of a curve in it, so we're wanting that curve to be on the outside edge. So your measured side should go in. So when you're feeding it in, if you're looking at your casing, you shouldn't be seeing the measurements basically. So we're just going to pop that inside there. So if you just open up that little end there so that it sits against the main bag fabric, and just slide that in, push it all the way in till it won't go any further, and do the same with the other piece on the other side. And there's a little bit of room for them to move in there, which was intentional, so that you can still sew around it. And now we're going to come back, so that's in there, it's fairly flexible. We're going to come and sew down this other side, just like we did on this side. So just start a little bit down, reverse back up to the top, and then come all the way down to the fold, trying to make sure that there's no little pleats occurring inside, because it'll kind of want to do that. So we'll just go and do that quickly now. Just make sure that tape is pushed that way a little bit, so that there's no chance of it getting in the way of the sewing machine at all. Try and keep that pleat free inside there. Right. So because we're working on a small fiddly little thing and we've got this little bit of batting showing here, what I found works best for me is actually just to trim that little edge away now. So I'm just going to trim off this little bit of an edge. The little bit of batting is sticking out, and I just want to neaten this edge because it's going to be part of the inside of the bag. So I'm not going to take in the seam allowance too close, but I am just going to trim off really so that you don't see all that white batting. So just a little tiny tidy up there on both of those seams, and you'll find that when we come to neaten them, which I'll show you in a second, it'll be much easier to do. So that's just a nice neat little edge now. And so just to neaten that seam, I'm just going to use a zigzag stitch, and I just find that if I can go over that with a little zigzag, I get a much better result as far as a nice tidy edge inside. Now if you remember, when we started the straight seam, we didn't start right on the edge because we didn't want little snippy threads at the end. and we started it down a little bit and then reversed back. I'm going to do the same thing with the zigzag, and so I want the zigzag stitch to come into the seam allowance and then to go off over the edge. So just make sure that that's how that's going to work. But I do need to change my foot. I don't want to break a needle. Okay, that's better. Right, so just zigzagging so that it goes right over the edge of that seam. So it's starting a little bit down, reverse back to the top, and then all the way down to the bottom edge. Just a little reverse at the end. And so what we've now got is a nice tidy seam. So I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side here. And there I have a nice neat inside edge. Now when I made these little bags I thought they were kind of cute flat, but I really like the idea of them having a little bit of a base to them. So we're just going to snip off those little corners or sew them. So I'll quickly show you how to do that. So to do that I'm just going to open that out, pop my hand inside, and I just want to make this point here fall down the middle. So I'm going to pop press the seam to one side, but this should sit in a nice point along, so that the seam would be running along the center fold at the bottom if there was one. With this bit of batting in there, there's not much of a fold. And now I'm just going to sew right the way across that corner, and I'm going to sew about ½ an inch away from that point. So on the machine quite often you've got markings on your foot plate, but basically you want to be ½ an inch away from the point, sewing a straight line across. So pop that in the machine, and I have got markings on my foot plate here that I'm going to use, and I want to go back to my straight stitch now. And again, just a little back stitch at the beginning and end of this sewing row, just across there, and we'll come and do the other corner as well. Snip your threads. I'm not going to snip that corner off, I think it's so small that it doesn't need to come off. So same thing here, fold it so that this seam comes down and forms a nice point with an even fold either side. Push your seam to one side, ½ an inch away from that point. Little back stitch at the beginning, back stitch at the end. Whoops. And there we have our little bag already. Now because we've got this little snappy fastener, you probably keep hearing it snapping, but it's quite pliable, and we can just turn that through there, push out the little bottom corners there, fold that over nicely. Now because we had that curve, if you remember, in the tape measure, so that it was kind of curving out, it sits automatically closed. It's not at all hard to open. You can just pop your finger in there, push it open, you can hold it open, easy access to things inside, and it just will snap closed again. So that was the little snappy bag. Such a great idea, easy to do, great for gifts. I have been meaning to make a longer one for myself because I thought it would be a really good bag to store my rotary cutter in, but I just need to make one long enough. So you could use the same width and extend the length. They would also make great glasses cases to keep your spectacles in if you're glasses wearers, and things like that. Really you could make them any size in any direction. You could make it larger. Of course you would need to cut your tape bigger. If you were making something that needed to be a little bit more sturdy, I would suggest a sturdier and wider metal tape to start with, because this one is quite soft. But I think that that would be great. You could keep a little travelling sewing kit, little pair of scissors and a needle and thread in there, or it could be a little cosmetics, it could be just anything you like. So that was the little snappy bag. Thank you.